All right, today we're going to be doing a bit of a throwback, talking about the Acacia Strain's 2020 album called Slow Decay. I'm going to mention the 2019 EP that they put out as well, and then we'll watch the music video for 1000 Painful Stings, which features Courtney LaPlante from Spiritbox. Now, for those of you who haven't been paying a lot of attention to the Acacia Strain, they have been on an absolute tear in the last couple of years. Somehow, as they go deeper into their career, they get better, which is extremely rare for heavy bands. Now, even though this review is about Slow Decay, I'm actually going to start off talking about the 2019 EP that they put out the year before, called It Comes in Waves. And part of the reason why is because this was the biggest step forward that the band took in terms of experimenting with new sounds and styles. Some of which I never expected to hear from the Acacia Strain at all. And so that was really cool to hear them branch out like this. They've always been menacing and had this sort of like apocalyptic feel, but this EP has some doom metal influences and some really cool spacey atmospheres, and all of that helps to push the lyrics to the forefront. Now, I want to note that this EP is meant to be listened to from start to finish, not as individual songs. It is a concept EP, so it tells a story. Each song is connected, and that's why each song is one word that, when combined, makes the sentence, "Our only sin was giving them names." It is kind of similar to the 27-minute long song that they put out in 2014 called Observer, which is one of my all-time favorite songs from the band. If you haven't heard it before, you definitely have to give it a listen. It will probably blow your mind the first time that you listen to it all the way through. So after exploring new sounds in 2019, not many people expected them to follow it up with Slow Decay, with a full album 1 year later. And honestly, a lot of people weren't even sure what was going on at first, because the band started releasing two songs at a time with a different letter on the album art of each pair of singles. And after five separate releases, the album art spelled Decay, and the band announced that the new album was titled Slow Decay. Like I mentioned in the Angel Maker video last week, I am not the biggest fan of that release pattern of like singles and just kind of like leaving breadcrumbs, and it's just like an extended scavenger hunt to put everything together, and then they release the whole album with a couple other extra songs that you haven't heard before. I'm not sure. They obviously did it for marketing purposes. I think maybe it helps fans stay more engaged, even though it doesn't really work for me that way. But it did keep the band in the headlines for months, which was hugely successful in that regard. So I don't know, maybe that drip feed of new music helps keep people involved. I'm not sure. But anyway, regarding the actual songs, on Slow Decay, the Acacia Strain kind of returned to their classic sound, with Vincent Bennett leading the way with his vocals. And for anybody who hasn't seen the Acacia Strain live, they are one of the very few bands that is heavier in a live setting than they are on the albums. And part of the reason is Vincent's vocals are just unreal. He has superb range. Even though I talk about his like droning, monotonous screams, in a live setting, his range is so good, and it really complements the apocalyptic feel, especially when the instruments slow down on some of the songs like Solace and Serenity. The Acacia Strain just overall does the ominous moments really well. The start of Feed a Pigeon, Breed a Rat is really off-putting and unsettling, with that sound just like kind of an alarm going off at the beginning, and then the explosion of sound that follows. It's the perfect start to the album to just beat you down right from the start and just break you down. Chinamasta also reminds me of the band's earlier work with the thick grooves and the vocal patterns, and as much as I like the fast, aggressive tracks, I've always thought that the Acacia Strain really shines on their more restrained songs like Birds of Paradise, Birds of Prey. Vincent's vocals on those ones, his screams, they just sound so overwhelmingly sad, and that kind of sounds bad when I say it like that, but I mentioned before just the band's overall tone is so pessimistic and like doomsday, apocalyptic, like end of the world, that his just like anguished vocals hammer it home, and it's just so impactful to me the way that he can tie it all together like that. It's just, for me, the Acacia Strain is the epitome of like misery and suffering, and like that is the defining feature of the Acacia Strain. So, for new fans, you might look at a band like this and think, oh my god, their discography is so extensive. How could I possibly dive in? You know, it's hopeless. There's no way that I can listen to all of this stuff. And I will admit that they do have a lot of albums and a lot of really good albums. You know, there's not really just like one or two that you can focus on. So, if this is a band that you're interested in getting to know more about, I would start with this album, Slow Decay. I would maybe not listen to the EP from 2019 just because that is a different sound for the band. And when you're more familiar with them, it's kind of cooler to hear them experiment and branch out like that. But, you know, maybe just start with Slow Decay and work your way backwards. And eventually you're going to get back to like fan favorites like Wormwood and Continent. And, you know, those are the whole reason that the band blew up in the first place. And then they continued to build on top of that and get to where they are now. So with that, let's just go ahead and watch the music video for 1000 Painful Stings. Like I mentioned before, this features Courtney LaPlante from Spiritbox. And this is such a fun music video. I have a blast watching this one. It gives you a little insight into like how silly and goofy they are, and kind of just like, I don't know, it feels a little bit more personal than just the typical music video. Obviously, the reason why is because this came out in 2020 when, I mean, COVID's still happening, but like kind of in the peak of it, I guess you could say. And so they had to just kind of have a makeshift way of doing it, and this is what they came up with, and I think it works pretty well.
You think I'm scared of death? I've done it a million times.
And you can hear
Great at it.
the sample right at the start of the track, and that's something the Acacia Strain does a lot, and they do it extremely well. And I mentioned that track, Observer, a couple minutes ago, and they have 3 samples in that track. It's just an amazing way for them to set the mood, and they do such a good job of picking the samples that just like encapsulate the attitude and the feel of the song. So you can kind of see like Vincent's vocals, a lot of them, it's like this monotonous droning. You know, there's some subtle variations going on, but for the most part, it's just like beating you over the head, just like hammering the point home. It's the perfect way to complement these types of instrumentals. This right here is like classic Acacia Strain. And if you haven't realized, the person with the mustache drawn on is Courtney from Spirit Box. So it's kind of hard to pick one song that gives you a good idea of what the Acacia Strain is all about, and what this album is all about. You know, when you look at the album as a whole, these types of interludes are really cool and really helpful. I don't think it's the strongest way that they could have ended this song individually. You'll hear the intro that's gonna, or the outro that's gonna be coming up. But that's why you have to listen to the album as a whole, and like especially the EP that's meant to be listened to as a whole. You can't really cherry pick the songs that you're gonna listen to. You have to kind of let the whole thing wash over you and take it all in. So the one thing I want to say is I actually don't think that this feature of Courtney is really good at all. It's kind of an interesting way to put her in, just like in the outro, just singing, not making use of any of her screams. You know, I think it could have been done a little bit differently, but like I said before, you kind of have to take it and view the album as a whole and not just this one song. Like, you'd have to look at what comes after this song, and how this leads into that one, because the Acacia Strain does a lot of that type of stuff. But the reason that I picked this one, and the last thing that I wanted to mention for this review, is that the Acacia Strain, if you look at the bands that they tour with and the bands that they work with, like, their tour packages are really, really diverse in terms of like the bands that they bring out, like hardcore bands, metalcore bands, death metal bands, deathcore bands. Like, they do not discriminate or like box themselves in. Like, they fully embrace the idea that like, we are going to put some eyes on these other bands, and then their fans are going to put their eyes on us. You know, by touring with all these different bands, we're going to get a crowd that is going to really know one or two bands, and then they're going to be exposed to a couple of bands over here that they have never heard of, and like they probably never would hear of otherwise if we weren't playing a show together. So that's one thing that I really, really do like about the Acacia Strain, and just like their work ethic, and like how they collaborate and work with other bands. And you know, this song came out in 2020, which is a year before Spirit Box's album came out, when they like really blew up. You know, Spirit Box had been a band beforehand, but in general, like this and like Knocked Loose and some other bands, the Acacia Strain has a good ear for bands that have so much potential and are going to blow up in the future. You know, in a way, they're kind of like a trendsetter influencer there. If you were to pay attention to them, they have some really good picks of like bands to pay attention to. So huge props to the Acacia Strain. This album is phenomenal. The EP was phenomenal. I can't believe that they're doing so well this deep into their career. They're literally getting better and better. And it just makes me more and more excited for what they're going to do next, because, you know, based on this trajectory, it's going to be pretty impressive. Hopefully, maybe an album this year, or maybe start of 2023. Who knows for sure? But if they stick to the typical timeline, hopefully it'll be around then. And I can't wait. So hope you guys liked the review. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch, and I will see you next time.